was the Vice President of Video Lottery Gaming and Operations in the province of Saskatchewan. It's a province in Canada of about 1 million people. And we run a gaming program run by the Saskatchewan government, where we have about 4,000 video lottery terminals, or EGMs, connected to a central system across the province. It's interesting because with video lottery terminals, they're essentially a slot machine running a customized gaming platform that aligns to jurisdictional specifications that are defined by each province. But if you ever came to Canada, you'd see some familiar slot games actually in these bars. They should typically in bars and restaurants where you have these machines, anywhere from 3 to 14 machines in our case at each site, about 600 sites across the province. Our program was established back in 1995, back when the communications were based on serial communications. There wasn't a lot going down the wire. It was very basic command and control information and aggregated machine activity and accounting information. Each site has a small PC or purpose-built computer, called a site controller, that aggregates all that information. And my involvement started back in 2006 with the GSA, when we also used to run the slot program for the province of Saskatchewan. And it was interesting to see the games themselves in even back in 2006 were very sophisticated, making heavy use of the inbuilt architectures of the technology platforms of slot machines, and yet the protocol in place, SAS is a bitmap protocol, very limited in functionality, lots of issues trying to connect on a single serial wire. It worked, but you had to be a bit of a engineer to keep things working. And there was always issues with signs not talking properly to the slot machines in this case. And obviously with the VLTs are on a separate central system speaking a totally different protocol. So at some point we thought about running slot machines on the VLT platform. We simply couldn't. The protocols just weren't compatible. And meanwhile, there's all these other systems that are orbiting the central slot machine or EGM platforms, player tracking or hospitality, marketing, what have you. And again, they're all talking their own separate protocols, and they're all separate application stacks. So there's a real rat's nest of technology. And we in Saskatchewan, along with our partners across Canada and other Canadian provincial jurisdictions, said, there has to be a better way. And as we would go to the G2E conferences, and we'd talk about the GSA, and we were talking about what is our technology strategy moving forward that allow us to enable much more versatility, increase integrity, even improve speed to market. What the G2S protocol promised seemed very compelling. So back in 2006, we formed a collective group. We started talking about buildings back then, enterprise service buses and enterprise service-oriented architectures. Along with this, we talked about trying to make, systems where all these systems were independent and agnostic of one another, but had some way to talk to one another. And again, the design philosophy of the GSA with its open standard offered a way to break down a lot of barriers that were artificially in place by the slot machine vendors in particular, who obviously wanted to protect their individual markets. Sorry, there was a question, or? Okay. So what we decided to do is approach all the technology vendors and say, okay, what is your technology strategy, and what are your thoughts on open standards? And that's this all started in about 2006. Interestingly, one of the challenges I think that G2S has had in its early days is the resistance to adopt it by the gaming vendors, because there was a cost, there was an implementation activity that they had to undertake, and it was just easier to just stick with the old protocols. So there were some very brave attempts in properties like Aria on the Las Vegas Strip. I'm sure GSA folks getting other properties where they did try to go with pure G2S floor. But the G2S functionality in the slot environment has always been somewhat limited in its capabilities, um, just because it's easier to sell the slot theme than it is to sell the protocol to customers. So again, unless the technology professionals within a particular establishments were particularly forward-thinking or even brave, it was difficult for them to advance the G2S protocol. Conversely, in Canada, we had a habit of buying all of our VLTs at the same time. And this was a very unique opportunity. It's what I would describe as a greenfield opportunity. So in Saskatchewan, we buy 4,000 VLTs at one time. Alberta was 6,000. Atlantic Canada was 6,000. Manitoba was 6,000. Quebec, it was like 12,000. So literally tens of thousands of slot machines all got replaced in a matter of a couple of years. And so we had a very unique opportunity to leverage G2S and actually see it properly implemented. And one of the things that we found as government organizations who are very cautious of making large investments, we tend to affiliate with vendors that provide assurances that of compatibility with the central system. And oftentimes the central system vendors would also offer VLTs. So it wasn't a very competitive landscape. G2S changed that dramatically because through our work with the GSA, and we participated in a number of meetings over the years, we said, okay, we want to use G2S in video lottery terminals. And originally the vendor response was, well, that's a bad idea. It's just going to cost you money. It's not going to, get you anywhere. And we stuck with it because, the one benefit that Canadian operators has, we weren't competitors. We weren't one casino next door to another. So we collaborated. We said, this is better. This is far more cost effective for our stakeholders, the government organizations that pay our bills. So we were completely transparent and objective, and focused on that singular goal of optimizing the competitive landscape and getting the best return on investment for the platforms that we were purchasing. And obviously, slot machines aren't cheap, so we want to make sure we don't have to buy more than we need to. And through, say, a number of meetings with the vendors, the GSA, the central system vendors, and through our procurement practices, we forced the adoption of G2S. In fairness to IGT at the time, a company called GTech, they really did blaze the trail and were the first central system vendor to offer a truly comprehensive G2S platform from soup to nuts. Like I say, in the slot world, there were some capabilities with some player tracking and some game downloads, some counting, but oftentimes it was just translated into SaaS at a later stage. It wasn't truly G2S from the ground up. And here we are. So that process, we actually implemented our first G2S platforms in 2012. That's when they went live. Here we are 8 years later now. We're actually in right now looking to buy some VLTs, and it's so easy to say, it's an open standard protocol. Go get it from the GSA. Go get your protocol stack from Comtrade if you haven't got one. Test your protocol against GLI, who's the testing agency, and it's much more off the shelf. So rather than making this very convoluted proprietary environment, we have opened the video lottery terminal environment. So we now have a much more open, competitive landscape. So we have achieved that goal. To Mark's earlier point about data mining, the one thing that we found with G2S is that it's very, very chatty. There is a ton of information exchanged in any G2S environment. SAS was designed to be very light. As I say, it was a bitmap protocol, so it had ones and zeros to indicate the state of various parameters and responses. And so it was a very light protocol. G2S is an XML-based protocol, so text-based. There is some compression that can be done a lot, during the data transmission and receiving, but the amount of data it creates, especially if you log it, is enormous. The huge value is that knowledge is power. With all that knowledge, you can find out exactly what's going on at the machine, how it's configured. You can manage its integrity far better because you can understand all these parameters. With SAS, it was very much fire and forget or hit and hope that the parameters would get there and maybe propagate to the machine. Sometimes it didn't. Sometimes machines would be told to be disabled and they would stay online being playable where they shouldn't be. Um, all those problems went away with G2S because you knew exactly what was going on. And now in our current environment, we're looking to mine the spin level data that is being created by the video lottery terminals. Our biggest challenge is, like I say, we have 600 sites. They're hundreds of miles away in many cases. We have to bring that data um, into our central system. So as I say, so it's the atomic spin level data that comes from every game cycle. We're talking about millions of rows of information per week, many gigabytes of information per month, and the problems are, where do you aggregate it, where do you store it, let alone how do you process it to get meaningful information. However, once you do gather information, because of the volume of information traceability that G2S protocol offers, you can actually find out when a player entered a game, what they placed, what kind of bet they placed, the spin cycle, the game outcome, whether they switched games, what type of notes they inserted, and all of this, so essentially the entire player journey through their EGM experience or their EGM session. And there's huge value in that, and we're really only just scratching the surface of that. So I think that it's been a long journey. Let's say for me, it started in 2006. So here we're 14 years later, really only just starting to leverage those benefits now. And largely, to Mark's point, is because of the very tightly regulated environments that the gaming markets are in. So it's easy to make a beautiful game leveraging the best graphic cards and the processing power, because that's really about the game aesthetic. But when you talk about managing the game, the integrity, the central systems, the accounting, the security, the command and control stuff, regulators get very uncomfortable changing stuff very quickly until they fully can understand it. Again, through the educational programs that the GSA has offered in the past and the online education they offer now, regulators can just go online and learn about the G2S protocol and realize it's a good thing. It's a good thing for them. It's a good thing for, again, the stakeholders they represent. And I haven't even begun to even describe the benefits of G2S in terms of its ability to share with other systems. It's a web-based framework essentially. So you could create just an instance, a G2S listener, for example, and just stick it on a switch in a network and start listening to all the G2S traffic from various machines that will talk to that host. It's just another G2S host. The G2S protocol is extensible by its very nature. Unfortunately, the EGM vendors haven't quite got their heads around that some third-party unknown piece of hardware could actually do that. But theoretically, it's possible if technology professionals and business professionals could actually find the rationale to actually push that forward. And then taking that one step further, there's absolutely no reason why you couldn't have, as I say, these orbital systems where an activity on your VLT has some kind of effect in your hospitality system, whether it's just aggregating player points, or maybe the central system can link into the hospitality system and say, oh, this guy's in an expensive room. Let's maybe offer some games that are a higher wager. One of the good features of G2S is the responsible gaming features as well. So you can actually give the players a enjoyable gaming experience without necessarily pushing products that aren't necessarily warranted for a particular player profile. So I'm personally very excited about the journey we've had with G2S and the GSA as a whole. I think we're definitely a practical example of what benefits can be leveraged. And one of the things is Saskatchewan is actually running, actually ran, I should say, in 2017. We were the first organization to launch a truly fully G2S based wide area progressive. Saskatchewan was first, Greece was second. There were other organizations that had progressives that were running a variation. Usually they were SAS with some G2S again for the game downloads and stuff. But in our environment, it is entirely G2S, and that was unique in 2017. It's a product that's not that well known, and it's remarkable when you actually see how it all works. the actual mechanics of it underneath. It's really is a thing of beauty from a technology point of view. And again, G2S created that. We could have taken the easy option, and at the time people said it wouldn't work in G2S. It had to be SAS. We said no, we're committed to the G2S protocol. We want that. We found later, in that the issue was the horsepower of the machines. It was, again, because it's such a heavy protocol. Um, the it required additional processing power in some of these older slot machine cabinets, and really that did expose something more interesting as well, that the slot machine vendors were actually selling um, you know quite expensive slot machines with pretty limited hardware, because some of the games, especially like video poker, I mean, it needs a very basic, it's almost an 8-bit type of game, very very limited in its processing requirements. But you had a protocol like G2S that is always managing everything, and everything's talking to one another, and all the technology components in the environment are being enumerated and addressed. Um, you need a fairly significant processor by 2017 standards. Now, in most of our slot machines have, yeah, I'd say middle tier i7s and i5s running the whole environment. But we have seen some vendors choose to have separate processors. They have a protocol processor and then a game processor. Um, and that's certainly another architectural choice, although it does add cost to the machine. Yeah, it was one of the but as I say, none of these are all lessons learned along the way in making things better. And I think we're going to look back in time and say, not only was it the right choice, that we are going to build upon that choice and leverage even further benefits from time to come, especially when you think about the TPI components, etc., that are coming into play, and also, like I say, the comfort it gives regulators in the ability to actually manage the machine state and its integrity. So
Eric, if you could, I wonder if I could impose upon you to talk a little bit about the remote configuration and download aspect of G2S, and how you're using that and the value you've seen from that aspect.
absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, thanks for asking that. I always forget that's one of the best features we actually implemented. Um, so back in the early 2000s, as I say, machines were all serial based. Um, Game downloads just weren't possible. They were theoretically possible, but we were talking about modems that were at best 14.4K, very very limited in bandwidth. Um, it wasn't really practical to download anything game wise over that type of connection over 4,000 machines. So one of the things we were really excited about was the ability to download games. I believe Quebec was the first jurisdiction that actually implemented that, and then everybody followed suit. I think we were the second actually after that, and it changed our world overnight for two reasons. Um, One, from an integrity point of view, when we had a game issue, and we did, we were changing a lot when we did our migration in 2012. We were changing machines had different operating systems, different protocols. They were using different development tools, and we had at least two games that had to be immediately changed because of in production issues, and we were able to just literally apply the package and download it. And as it was a new technology, it was a little clunky, not on the G2S side, on the application side, and that's an important distinction, perhaps to come back to. G2S gives you the solution, but developers have to apply it practically to the problem. Um, so the technology, the G2S side worked beautifully, but it saved us in our first year. I would like to say we saved at least $1.5 million in deployment costs, because every time we had to go to all 4,000 machines and change some software. We probably figured that was, I don't know, $300,000 or $400,000 in time and travel expenses and manpower costs and materials and what have you. And we did probably, yeah, I'd say at least 5 game downloads of significant magnitude over the first 18 months of our G2S implementation. Um, and it was a game changer, an absolute game changer. The ability to just say, slot machine, go get this new game as soon as it's ready, and to make sure you have the right version, you have GAT in the background, and if the machine somehow didn't take the game, then it would just take itself out of service. Now, the worst case scenario is we'd have to send a technician at that point. That was more a problem with the game than the protocol. The protocol did its job. It made sure that the right software was running on the machines, the right machines at the right time. Um, it saved us enormous costs in terms of the operating expenses of doing those downloads. And like I say, it provided the regulators great comfort. We could have, and again, GAT is a very, very comprehensive component too. The way it enumerates all the software items in the manifest it's very detailed. Whereas the old slot platforms, it was just a CRC check. It would just take the whole bundle of software and say, this is the CRC for this binary. With GAT, you can actually nail it down to the individual components that are potentially problematic. Um, and then even further to that, we even started working with there's a GDS, a game system. What the GDS stands for, game
Game
device.
device.
Game device. So we're able to download firmware to bill acceptors, printers. Again, is a great game changer. Every time a technician in our world, every time a technician visits a site, it's a significant amount of money because, as I say, they're hundreds of miles away in many cases. Travel costs, travel time. If the technician doesn't have the right USB stick to upgrade that software, all of that goes away, and we can just say which machines get which software when. Boom, done. So we a lot of our focus is on testing that capability. But once it's in production, it is smooth as butter. It's quite a remarkable thing when you think about how, by comparison, how stunted we were in the early 2000s. G2S has been a real enabler in that regard.
And then Eric, if I might, you mentioned GAT and what a game changer that is from a
Mhm.
regulatory perspective. Yesterday, Chris Fleener, who is from the Kansas regulators, sorry, Ohio, from the Ohio Gaming Commission, and we had Todd Nelson, who recently just left the Missouri Gaming Commission, and they also were talking about GAT. They talked about serial GAT and network GAT, and then
Mhm.
they touched on G2S GAT, and they started to say how G2S GAT really was the game changer. I
Mhm.
think one of the features of G2S GAT that you and the other operators in the Canadian provinces utilize is the ability for G2S GAT to automatically check
Mhm.
the authenticity of software when some events occur. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, absolutely. So in our case, we have a jurisdictional requirements. Now, I'm guessing they're fairly similar to other operators as well. Every time you access the logic door and close it, it detects that switch and it'll start doing a GAT. Every time the machine does what they call a full comms online. I don't know if you guys have done your G2S training, you should understand the difference between the full and the light. The full comms online will essentially be the bootstrap from a like a cold boot. Um, it will do a GAT then in the background as well. In our case, we've elected to allow the GAT to run in background because in our view, we've accepted the risk that it may take maybe 30 to 45 minutes to perform GAT. We'll let the machine run for that long. The risk is fairly small of anything bad occurring in that time on that one machine. Um, but again, it's a real game changer because even if somebody monkeys with takes an SD card and pops it in the machine and changes the software, as soon as that machine comes up, because it can't talk to the central system unless it's authorized to. The central system's going to go, well, here's your GAT authentication, here's your seed. What's my response, please? And GAT goes, well, here's the response. And central system says, no, we're not friends anymore. We're not talking, and you're offline. And it's again, it gives great comfort to the operators, sorry, the regulators, that we can provide that level of information. In actual fact, quite interestingly, before GAT, we used to send out. We didn't. Our partners in the provincial government used to send regulators. So yeah, real game changer for us for sure.
And this might be a little bit outside of your wheelhouse per se, Eric, but um, Andrew Cardinal yesterday was talking about the fact that back in the day having a customer database was great, and we would collect some information about the games that they played and maybe the amount of money that they wagered. Whereas today, the amount of data that we get from Twitter feeds, from all of the social media platforms, from all of the different systems that are in use in casinos, in parlors, in integrated resorts, and whereas before we sort of knew what the information was and we were just looking to understand the known relationships, today we've got completely unstructured data with unknown relationships, and we're just trying to make sense of it. So, out of curiosity, from a marketing perspective, can you talk a little bit about, have they seen any benefit from G2S and the data that it provides, as you mentioned, from a per spin perspective and a per player perspective?
We're starting to explore that. Interestingly, Saskatchewan is maybe a little more unique than some. We have a very conservative view to player identification, should I say? It's a sensitive topic. Um, the contrast is this: if you go to a casino, the first thing they do is say, well, if you want to have $10 of free play, we need to see your driver's license to verify you're of age. And it's
Right.
a great system for them. They get to know who you are and they get to verify your age. You get $10 and you feel fine about that. Well, that data is extremely valuable. It's worth way more than $10 to a casino, obviously. Um, and you willingly give that information. So then the question is, how do you get to know your player if you can't know who your player is? Um, and originally on the old platforms, we had what we describe as occupancy data. So we would get creative. We would say, okay, let's look at the revenue information every hour for various games, and that will at various locations. And that will give us some degree of information about the demographic playing those games, and what games are popular when. So we know, for example, that Keno, if you're familiar with Keno, it's kind of like a lottery type game where you pick bowls and it picks them for you. That's very popular, generally speaking, with the senior citizens who like to play that in the morning. We've learned this, and then we've gone to sites and actually see this in practice. And certain games are popular with younger demographic, and then there are games we describe as our core player games that are played all the time. And through the old protocols, we've determined that level of information, and that was a start. But we want to get a little more granular now. We want to say, okay, why are certain games popular in certain venues at certain times? And maybe it's not a one size fits all. Again, from a government point of view, we tend to take things very conservatively, and we roll out the same VLT platform to every single site in kind of a cookie cutter fashion. And it works, but could it work better is the question. Um, and we don't have enough data to really support that theory. Um, and I think G2S has that information, because again, it has the granular information of a player session was started, the money was inserted, how much they inserted, what type of bills they inserted. If they inserted a bunch of 20s all back to back, they probably went to the ATM. They inserted a bunch of low denomination bills and etc. Then perhaps that's a different type of player. Um, and then the player profile, did they max bet? Did they max bet on certain games? There's a way of finding out who your players are without necessarily interacting them. But it does require diving really, really deep into, say, that very, very granular information that the games do pump out. We've seen it because we see currently all the information sits in diagnostic records that are stuck at the site controller at each location. And then it gets wiped every 24 hours and starts afresh with a new daily session. We want that granular information. It's enormously valuable. But again, and I've seen it on the slot world in past as well, where I've seen other jurisdictions express concern. They've had like terabytes of this spin level data, and they just can't process it. They don't know how to. And I know somebody has talked about using Hadoop or R or any kind of heavy duty statistical and big data tools to analyze it. We're just really scratching the surface. But I think it's like any of these tools. Once one person cracks it, others will follow. We know Greece actually did a demonstration of some of the analytics they did harvesting the G2S information. The key distinction was they actually have a player card. Their environment is all carded play. It's all cashless on their AGMs. So they have the most beautiful set of analytics in terms of player profile. What was interesting is that the information they presented to us in one of our webinars was very similar to the findings we had theorized upon based upon the limited information we had. So I think that, as I say, as we dig into that a little bit, we're gonna find enormous value in that granular information. And as I said in one of the meetings, it's the approach needs to be kind of how do you eat the elephant one bite at a time. So let's look at daily data, weekly data, monthly data, yearly data. Then you can really work out how you're going to store it and process it in an optimal way. Interestingly, just stepping back a bit on the reuse of concepts. One of the things in Saskatchewan, we were the first to have an anonymous player registration. There was a responsible gaming extension that was provided to the GSA many years ago by a company that went out of business, a company called TechLink. They brought forward responsible gaming because that was important to one of their customers in Atlantic Canada years ago. Well, they went out of business, disappeared. They're no more. I'm not sure where they went, but they left behind the specifications and the protocol capabilities within G2S for responsible gaming. And we have all in Canada enjoyed the benefit of that. And I think in Greece as well. So from that small acorn, these great oaks have grown. And really, we didn't have one customer had to ask for it. The vendor took a chance of investing in it. Unfortunately, they didn't make it. Every other vendor has benefited. Every other customer has benefited, all because of openness. So there is a classic example of the intrinsic benefits of an open standard like G2S. If that was SaaS and that was some proprietary player tracking system, it would have died and disappeared a long time ago. So now that and it's creating useful data that will persist forever in an open environment. It's fantastic.
That's a great example. Absolutely. Erik, I don't know if there's any other topics related to G2S that you want to cover.
Oh, I'm sure I could talk for hours, but I'm sure you have other things to do. But if you have any questions, by all means, I'm happy to answer what I can. So
our audience tends to be kind of quiet. They don't ask a lot of questions. We do have a Q&A session that is coming up on Friday their time. So perhaps I'll see if there are any questions. Anybody have any questions for Mr. Karmark before we let him go? All right, I see no hands. In that case, Erik, I thank you very much for taking the time this evening to talk to us. Thank you for sharing your experiences with G2S. Great stuff is always the case.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. Have a good night. Have a good morning. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.